Hi everyone. This week we are sewing a line skirt. A line skirt is nothing but two skirts that you sew and then you put one inside of the other. The inside skirt is your lining, the outside skirt is your main skirt. The process is the same for both skirts. You're going to cut your skirts, you're going to sew them separately, you're going to gather them separately, you're going to hem them separately, and then you're just going to bring the two of them together, basically putting one of them inside of the other. The waistband is a little different from the waistband from our gathered skirt. This time around, we're going to be sewing 3 channels. We're going to have 3 pieces of elastic. The elastic is going to be a lot narrower. I hope you like this tutorial, and if you end up sewing a skirt based on this tutorial, I would very much like to see that. For this project, I cut 4 pieces of fabric. 2 pieces for the main skirt, 2 pieces for the lining. They are both the same width, but the lining is a little shorter than the main skirt. You don't want the lining to show unless you really want the lining to show. When cutting the waistband, you have 2 options. You can cut it with the straight grain of the fabric, and that's what I did, placing it on the fold, or you can cut with a cross grain of the fabric. Once the waistband is cut, I ironed it just to make sure that number 1, my pieces are nice and flat, and number 2, to create a crease that marks the middle of the waistband. This is going to help me when I pin one side of the waistband to the other side. Then I pressed 1/2 inch on the side of the waistband that's going to be inside. That's going to give us a nice clean finish for that waistband. Using the crease as my guide, I pinned the waistband ends together, short ends together, and once the waistband was pinned, I took it to the sewing machine and I sew a row of straight stitches, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once my waistband was sewn together, I pressed the seam open to reduce any sort of bulk. I marked the front and back centers of both skirts with a pin, and then using 3 rows of basting stitch, I just started together from the outside in, from the side seam to the center until my skirt matched the waistband. When one of the skirts had been gathered, all I had to do was go ahead and gather the other skirt to match the previous gathered skirt. I find it is easier to gather both the skirt and the lining before it is pinned to the waistband, but I can always make changes once everything is pinned together. I then quartered the waistband using the side seams as my guide, placing a pin for front center and another pin for the back center. This will help me once it's time to pin the skirts to the waistband. I will have 4 points of contact or 4 notches that will make gathering and pinning everything together much easier. So now I have 2 skirts, the main skirt and the lining skirt, and it's time to pin them together. All you're going to do is slide one of your skirts inside of the other, right sides facing each other. You want the pretty side of your main skirt to face the pretty side of your lining. And I always start pinning by the side seams. It makes it easier. It is the most obvious point of contact. I can easily match both side seams, and from there I can come back, match the front and center backs, and then work on any gathers that don't look well distributed. Once your main skirt and your lining skirt have been pinned together, it's time for you to go ahead and pin them to the waistband. Once again, I always like to start with the side seams just because they are obvious points of contact. You're going to have a lot of threads because if you are gathering like I do, you're going to have 3 rows of gathering stitch per side. So just take all of those threads out of the way, but make sure that you can get to them in case you need to go ahead and you need to play around with the gathers to match the waistband to the skirts. Once you have pinned one of the side seams, you can move on to the center front, then the second side seam, finishing by matching the back center of the waistband to the back center of the skirts. As a quick note, I hemmed the skirts before I gathered them and I pinned them to the waistband. Once you have the waistband pinned to the skirts, just make sure that everything matches nicely. It might be that you realize that certain sections have more gathers than others, or that the waistband and a certain section of gathers don't really match perfectly. So this is your opportunity to go ahead and play around with the threads to make sure that everything matches. Once you're satisfied, you're going to take your skirt to the sewing machine and you're going to sew the waistband to the skirts using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you're moving all those threads out of the way. There's a lot going on at this point in time, and you just want to make sure that everything is going to line up nicely. Do not sew over your pins, just remove them as you get close to them and back stitch once you get to the end of that row of stitches. To make everything nice and tidy, I like to remove the gathering stitches before I sew the waistband shut. That just guarantees that everything inside is going to look as pretty as on the outside. I have graded the seam allowance here and I ironed that seam in the direction of the waistband so that when I encase it, everything is going to be sandwiched between the 2 layers of the waistband. When it's time to pin the waistband, I always pin from the inside first. I know I'm going to be sewing the waistband from the outside. I'm going to be stitching in the ditch, so I'm not going to see what's happening on the inside. This is why I like to take my time and I like to pin the waistband all the way on the inside to make sure that it looks nice. Then all I have to do is replace the pins that are inside with pins on the outside. I also need to make sure that I remember that I am going to be inserting elastic into the waistband. I'm going to create 3 casings. So I need to leave a portion of the waistband unstitched so that I can feed the elastic into the casings through that particular section. Once I have placed pins that clearly show the section I need to leave open, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start pinning the waistband from the outside and removing the pins that are inside so that I don't sew over any pins and end up breaking my needle. Once my waistband is finished, it's time to prepare the 3 casings for the 3 pieces of elastic. Instead of creating one big casing with 1 piece of white elastic, I am going to sew 3 smaller, narrower casings for 3 pieces of narrower elastic. I think this gives a really professional finish to the waistband, even though it takes a lot more time and a lot more patience. If you think you can eyeball the measurement of the casings, you don't need to go ahead and draw or mark them. I just like to have a guide. It makes it much easier when I'm sewing the waistband and I'm sewing all the casings. When it's time to sew the elastic channels, make sure that you remember that you need to leave an opening, and this is how you're going to get the elastic into each one of the channels. Also, when you're getting to the end of each one of your row of stitches, since you're not going to be overlapping them, make sure to backstitch so that your stitches are nice and secure. You're going to be using a safety pin to insert each one of the pieces of elastic into their respective channels. The safety pin allows you to feel for the head of the safety pin as you push the elastic into the casing. You're going to do that until both ends of the elastic can be seen. At that point in time, you're just going to sew the ends of the elastic together, and then you're going to be able to go back and close the opening. I like to pull on the skirt to make sure that it's evenly distributed all across the waistband, and just clip any hanging thread so that you can have a skirt that looks nice on the inside and out. So now you can see that sewing a line skirt is not that complicated. It is the same process, you're just sewing the same thing twice. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you use it to create a variety of skirts. And if you do create something based on this tutorial, I would very much like to see it.